Yes, yes, and yes. The UK tabloids are going to need several industrial-sized boxes of tissues after this one, because Prince Harry's Invictus Games just scored a massive, undeniable, very public win in Australia. And not a symbolic little thoughts and prayers win either. An actual government-backed, policy-level, money-on-the-table victory. The Australian government has officially reinstated funding for Invictus Australia after backlash erupted over proposed cuts, and the message from veterans, supporters, and communities was loud, clear, and impossible to ignore. Invictus matters. Prince Harry's work matters. The people served by Invictus matter. This program changes lives. That is the story. Human beings, recovery, community, survival. You know, the stuff that actually matters outside the fantasy kingdom of tabloid psychosis. The whole situation started when funding for Invictus Australia was cut in the federal budget, and immediately veterans and supporters sounded the alarm, because this was not some random recreational sports club losing extra funding for matching polo shirts. Invictus is deeply connected to mental health support, rehabilitation, recovery, social connection, and rebuilding lives after trauma. That is why the backlash exploded, because unlike the royal gossip industry, veterans cannot survive on headlines and exclusive sources. They need real support, and people were furious. Petitions began circulating, veterans started speaking publicly, communities rallied around Invictus Australia. The pressure grew louder and louder until the government reversed course and reinstated the funding. Think about how powerful that is for a second. A government was forced to reconsider because ordinary people, veterans, and supporters collectively said, "No, this program is too important." That is not celebrity fluff. That is impact. That is legacy. That is the kind of influence tabloids pretend Harry no longer has, while simultaneously dedicating their entire existence to covering his every move like exhausted exes refreshing Instagram at 2 a.m. The contradiction never stops being funny. Yet, somehow, governments still partner with Invictus. Global leaders still meet with him. Major networks still cover him. Veterans still support him. Communities still rally around his initiatives. And the public still pays attention. That is a very strange definition of irrelevant. At this point, the anti-Sussex media ecosystem feels less like journalism and more like a haunted support group for people unable to process the fact that Harry left. Because here's what really terrifies them. Invictus gives Harry credibility that cannot be manufactured by palace PR. You cannot fake wounded veterans standing beside you. You cannot fake people saying a program helped save their life. You cannot fake years of international participation and emotional testimonies from service members and families. You especially cannot fake governments restoring funding after public outrage. That happens because people genuinely value the work. And this is exactly why Invictus has remained one of Harry's strongest achievements. It cuts through all the noise. Invictus, it's practical, it's emotional, it's human. It's veterans rebuilding confidence after catastrophic injuries. It's athletes rediscovering joy after trauma. It's families finding hope again. It is people learning that they are more than their worst moments. That is why the project resonates globally. And honestly, you can see why Harry himself is so emotionally connected to it. This is not some vanity project created for optics. Invictus came from his experiences with veterans and wounded service members after returning from Afghanistan. He saw firsthand how many struggled after service. He saw isolation, pain, mental health battles, loss of identity. And instead of simply attaching his name to another ceremonial ribbon-cutting exercise, he helped create something tangible, something active, something alive. More than a decade later, it still matters enough for nations to fight to keep it funding. That is extraordinary. Meanwhile, certain royal commentators are still arguing over whether Harry held a handbag incorrectly in 2018. Human civilization remains a fascinating experiment. And let us talk about the timing of this victory, because it makes the whole thing even sweeter. For months now, there has been this ongoing narrative pushed by sections of the British media that Harry and Meghan are somehow failing. Every single thing becomes a disaster headline. Because here's the reality. Harry and Meghan are still globally relevant. Their projects still generate attention. Their causes still attract support. Their partnerships still matter. And Invictus, especially, continues to command enormous respect internationally. That Australian funding reversal proves that. You cannot spin your way around it. You can't scream woke loud enough to erase it. You can't bury it under 17 articles about Meghan's jam. The facts are sitting there in broad daylight. Veterans advocated for Invictus because they believe it helps save lives. The government listened. Funding was restored. That's the story. And honestly, it also exposes something uncomfortable about how Harry has been treated in parts of the British media. Because Invictus has consistently represented some of his most meaningful work. Yet even this has often been overshadowed by endless personal attacks. Think about how bizarre that is. A veteran-founded international sporting movement focused on wounded service members somehow became part of tabloid warfare. There were even moments when commentators seemed genuinely annoyed that Harry received praise during Invictus events. Imagine being bitter about wounded veterans receiving support because it interferes with your anti-Sussex agenda. That level of obsession should qualify for clinical study. But the public sees through it more and more, especially younger audiences. People can recognize authenticity when they see it. And regardless of what anyone thinks about monarchy drama, one thing has become increasingly clear over the years. Harry is at his strongest when he is connected to meaningful humanitarian work. That's where he looks energized, focused, confident, purpose-driven, not trapped inside palace protocol performing medieval theater for newspapers, pretending it's national survival. And Meghan has consistently supported that work too. One thing people often overlook is how much the Sussexes thrive when they operate independently, outside the institution, outside the rigid hierarchy. Outside the suffocating machine of never complain, never explain, while anonymous courtiers complain and explain to reporters 24 hours a day, Invictus represents freedom from that system. It represents action instead of image management. And the results speak for themselves. This Australian victory also sends a bigger international message. Governments are increasingly recognizing veteran mental health as a major issue, requiring long-term investment. Programs like Invictus are not luxuries. They are part of recovery infrastructure. The connection between sport, rehabilitation, social support, and mental well-being is well documented. Isolation kills. Purpose matters. Community matters. Connection matters. That is why veterans fought so hard for this funding to return. And honestly, hearing veterans speak publicly about how Invictus changed their lives is incredibly powerful. Some described feeling abandoned after military service. Others spoke about PTSD and depression. Others discussed physical injuries and the emotional devastation that followed. Invictus gave many of them a reason to reconnect with life again. A team, a goal, a support network, a reminder that they were not alone. That is not small. That is enormous. Which makes this government reversal more than just a funding story. It is recognition. Recognition that these people matter. Recognition that healing matters. Recognition that service members deserve support after sacrifice. And yes, recognition that Prince Harry built something genuinely meaningful.
That last part especially seems to irritate the anti-Sussex industry beyond comprehension because it ruins the caricature. It ruins the simplistic narrative they spent years trying to sell. The spoiled prince narrative collapses when veterans consistently praise his commitment. The unserious celebrity narrative collapses when governments continue supporting his initiatives. The irrelevant exile narrative collapses when global organizations keep partnering with him. Reality is stubborn like that. And honestly, Harry deserves credit for staying committed to Invictus, despite relentless attacks over the years. It would have been easy to walk away, easy to become cynical, easy to retreat from public life completely after everything he and Meghan endured. But Invictus remained constant. That consistency matters. People notice consistency, especially veterans. Trust is not built through PR slogans. It is built through showing up repeatedly over time. And Harry has continued showing up for Invictus year after year. That commitment is why the games command such loyalty and emotional connection from participants and supporters. There's also something poetic about this victory happening in Australia specifically, because Australia has often shown strong public warmth toward Harry and Meghan, despite attempts to manufacture hostility. The Sussex's 2018 tour was hugely popular with the public, and even now, there remains strong enthusiasm around their work, especially projects connected to mental health, veterans, and social impact. So seeing Australians rally around Invictus feels very fitting. It also quietly demolishes another favorite tabloid myth, that Harry and Meghan are universally hated everywhere outside palace walls. If that were true, people would not mobilize to defend projects connected to them. Governments would not reverse decisions under public pressure. Veterans would not passionately advocate for these programs. Again, reality refuses to cooperate with the fantasy. And can we take a moment to appreciate how absurd it is that some commentators still try to frame Harry leaving royal life as some catastrophic mistake, while stories like this keep happening? The man literally built an internationally respected veterans initiative. He and Meghan created independent platforms. They signed major deals. They continue humanitarian work globally. They maintain international visibility. And somehow the narrative is still, yes, but are they happy though? Meanwhile, Harry is surfing in California, attending Invictus events surrounded by veterans who adore him, raising his children away from the tabloid machine, and continuing projects he actually cares about. The horror. Truly devastating stuff. Somebody alert Buckingham Palace immediately. But beyond the humor and the royal drama, this really is worth celebrating. Sincerely. Because wounded veterans deserve support. Mental health programs deserve funding. Recovery deserves investment. And communities deserve initiatives that genuinely help people heal. Invictus represents all of that. This victory belongs first and foremost to the veterans who spoke out. Their voices mattered. Their testimonies mattered. Their courage mattered. They refused to stay silent when funding cuts threatened something deeply important to them. And because they spoke up, the outcome changed. That is powerful. It is also a reminder that public pressure can work. People often feel powerless when governments make decisions, but collective voices still matter. Communities still matter. Advocacy still matters. This story proves it. And for Harry personally, this must feel deeply validating, not because of ego, but because seeing something you created continue helping people over a decade later is profoundly meaningful, especially after years of relentless attempts to undermine him publicly. Invictus keeps standing. That resilience mirrors the veterans themselves. And maybe that is why the project resonates emotionally with so many people. It is not about perfection. It's about perseverance, falling apart and rebuilding, struggling and continuing anyway, finding strength through community. That spirit sits at the heart of Invictus. Not tabloid headlines, not palace politics, not social media outrage cycles. Human resilience. And honestly, in a media landscape increasingly dominated by negativity, cynicism, and performative outrage, stories like this feel refreshing. A genuinely positive outcome, a meaningful public response, a government listening to veterans, a successful reversal, a win rooted in compassion instead of scandal. More of that, please. The world already has enough bitter people yelling into microphones about Meghan's lifestyle brand. We can survive 1 week without another expert explaining why a woman arranging flowers is somehow a constitutional threat. Meanwhile, actual lives are being changed through programs like Invictus. That contrast says everything. So, congratulations to Invictus Games Australia. Congratulations to the veterans and supporters who fought for this funding. Congratulations to the communities that rallied together. And yes, congratulations to Prince Harry, because no matter how loudly critics scream, this remains one of the most meaningful royal-adjacent legacies of the modern era. Not a palace renovation, not a jewel collection, not a ceremonial title. A living, breathing, international movement helping wounded veterans rebuild their lives. That matters infinitely more. And somewhere tonight, a tabloid columnist is probably typing furiously about Meghan's homemade raspberry spread to cope with the emotional damage of seeing Harry succeed again. May they eventually find peace. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in Smiley here, and happy Thursday.